Welcome back, or if this is your first time here, welcome to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about rendering X particles in Octane. So I'm just going to be showing the very basics of how to get things on the screen and looking good and in a way where things are acting as you might expect them to act, and then also a few things that are useful to know in shading things, shading X particles in Octane specifically. After this, I'll probably just do another version of this video that'll be with Redshift, and probably gonna stop there in terms of the intro to rendering. Those are the two most popular renders as far as I know. I don't own Arnold, and I don't know if that many people actually use Cycles, which is the render that comes with X particles that for some reason it seems like nobody uses. When I've played around with it, it seems like it's pretty good, but anyway, let's jump right in. So let's just make an emitter really quick and get some particles on the screen. I'm gonna emit from this curve, object, and this curve, we're gonna set that to edges so we get that, except I want to render, or I want to emit up on the y-axis, so something like that. And I'm just gonna render a lot more particles. All right, so something like that. And then let's just add some turbulence. I like roar noise. Bump it up a little bit. Okay. And let's give the particles some colors. We're going to do gradient parameter and set that to speed. And let's set the speed max to around 250 and see how that looks. Looks all right. Okay, so we've got something there. All right, so the very basics of getting this to render are pretty simple. So let's say that all you want to do is just render these particles as spheres. We can go up to the emitter, right click, go to extensions, Cinema 4D Octane, add an Octane object tag. Just by doing that, if you don't do anything, and let's go to Octane and just press render, nothing's going to show up. Now, under particle rendering, obviously it says none. So if we set that to geometry, then you're going to get some spheres. But without doing anything else, you can't really do anything more with these spheres. They're just going to be gray spheres, which is not particularly useful. So what we need to do is specify a piece of geometry that we are going to use to be the thing that's getting rendered. Certain render engines like Redshift, this is one of the differences between Octane and Redshift. Redshift basically like comes with a bunch of primitives to be able to render particles without you actually having to assign a piece of geometry. But in Octane, you just kind of need to assign a piece of geometry right off the bat. That's fine. So let's just make a sphere. So one thing that's very important is that right now the radius of this sphere is 100. And if we go into my particle emitter, you'll see that the radius of my particles is 3. So if I assign this sphere at its current radius as the object to be rendered, and we come back and render this, you're going to see that my whole screen is very full with huge particles. So what's happening is the size of this sphere is getting multiplied by the radius of the particles. So good rule of thumb, for doing this sort of rendering, especially if you're just like rendering spheres, is to set this sphere's radius to 1. Then whatever your radius is here and your particle data, that's going to be the actual size of your particle. So since the radius here is set to 3, then each one of these is going to have a radius of 3. So let me just grab this sphere. I'm just going to drop it up here. And let's take our emitter and put the radius down to 1, and we just have to re-sim this. And so basically what I want to show is that these are the same size. So we can see that obviously 1 times 1 is 1, so these are all the same size. So keep in mind that the radius value here is going to be multiplied by the size of the model that you assign to be the thing that's getting rendered. Okay, another thing to know, it's a little thing, is that the object that you're going to be rendering needs to be, this is kind of annoying actually, but it needs to be visible in the scene. Like if I turn this sphere off, everything kind of loses its what it's doing. And even if I just disappear the sphere, but it's still sort of on, everything disappears. So again, what's best to do is just kind of get it out of the way. Just move it off to the side or just off camera. Okay, but you can see we've got something rendered. Let's make things a little bit more interesting. So if we go in here, the radius is 1, and let's add variation of 0.9 to these. So we're just going to get a lot of size variation in the particles. Alright, so that looks a bit cooler, but you can see that we've got a bunch of different colors and stuff going on here. All these are gray. So let's create a material. I'm just going to make a universal material here for Octane and jump into the shader graph for this. And basically all you need is this instance color node, and you need to drag the emitter into this color source, and then we can just connect that to our color. And make sure that you actually assign this. This needs to be assigned not to the emitter, but to the model that you are using. Okay. And that's the most basic setup, to just get it rendering your display colors. Okay, so let's so again, that's the end of the really basic setup of just getting your particles rendered. So let's talk about a few other things. So in certain situations, I'll give an example in a second, but you might just want something like a random color assigned to each particle, and Octane has a really helpful node for that called random color. So if we take this, assign this to the color, then you'll see we just have random colors. You can also control the distribution of these random colors by piping that through an Octane gradient and then crunching this in one direction or another. So you can see here we're getting more white and less dark colors, or you can get more dark and less light colors like that. So a practical example of why you might want to use something like this is let's plug back in our display colors. Let's go to emission down here and let's make a texture emission. And we're going to take this and let's make, why aren't you showing up? Okay, doesn't want to show up. Let's just grab a multiply node, not a switch node, multiply node. And we're going to take this in. Actually, before we even set that up, let's just take this and put this into the texture. And this, so we just made a Octane sky with just a black background, and I'm going to change this to path tracing and just make this a lot lower. And let's go into the emission and bring this down a lot. Okay, so now what we've got basically is a situation where some of these particles are glowing and some of them aren't. And we can come in here and we can really crunch how many are glowing by doing something like this. So then we've got this sort of look of a few particles here and there that are lit up. But they're all white. So what if you wanted to, this is what I was doing before, but just show you that first. So if you wanted them to have some color to that glow, then what we can do is take our actual color and multiply that by this. And we get something like this. If we, just while we're making this look interesting, come in here, add some post effects, add some bloom. Let's just add a ton and then increase the cutoff. Okay, so you can see you can get some pretty cool looking stuff really quickly. Also, so let's say, remembering that the radius is a multiplier of this sphere radius, and we've got variation in the size of our spheres here. If you want to change the radius like through some sort of dynamic particle action, you have to constantly resim. Like if you want to change the radius here and you want to see that reflected, you have to do a resimulation because the radius of the particles is a part of the simulation. But you can also just come in here and let's say we took our radius here and just change it to 0.5, and that will update immediately in the viewport, not in the viewport, in our live viewer. Say we set that to 0.2, and we've got a lot of little particles. So this is with no light, so everything is basically lit by these particles. Let's not get too sidetracked trying to make it look cool. Okay, so that is, again, those are the basics of just how to get your particles. I guess one more thing maybe I should mention is if you did want to do something where you've just got all the particles are lit, so we can come in here and just take this and drop this in here. And if we want to lower that, and then you can get this sort of look, this sort of glowy kind of look. Moving a little too much. Let's maybe, so I'm not dragging us all over the place, stock this. Let's move over here. Okay. So get something like this. And a way to kind of get these to have a little bit of a, like sort of more of an additive look inside of Octane, you just want to decrease the opacity. So if we decrease the opacity to say like 0.3, we might need more particles to make that more apparent. Let's just see what we can do before we do that though. If we increase the power here. Yeah, we don't want to do that. Let's leave this at 1. Let's pause this. Let's go to our emitter. We've got like 100,000. If we go into display HUD and say show, just so we can get an eye on about how many particles we've got. So this is about 200,000 particles. So I don't know, let's do like 10 times that. Something else worth mentioning in terms of working with lots and lots of particles, just a side note. One thing that you can do to make this more manageable, let's see, we're on frame 68, and let's start simming this and see what it looks like. It actually is not choking at all, really. We were at 68. Is that what I said? Whatever. Something like that. Well, what I was actually going to say was this this LOD parameter. Just remember that we can drop this down quite a bit. We just increased that by 10 times. So if we decrease this to just 10%, and our viewport will just be seeing the same amount, but when we render this, then we'll be seeing 10 times as many particles. If we, let's go into our camera, turn off autofocus. Let's say we're gonna focus on about right there and start to increase the aperture. And we can get some shallow depth of field and get this sort of look. And again, this is giving us this kind of like additive particle look. You see, like, gets really bright as these particles are on top of each other right here. And in this area back here, we got a little bit more of that. We can also come in here and put the aspect ratio, let's say to the aperture aspect ratio. This will give us a anamorphic bokeh. So like a stretched little circle thing. You guys probably know what that is. Maybe you do. Can't really see it that good. We need to see like individual little glowy bits to get more of a spotted sort of look in here. And now maybe we can actually go in here and increase this a little bit. Not that much. Maybe. So anyways, this is just, I always try not to go off on tangents, but also people probably don't want to see stuff being totally just academic without me ever making anything that looks somewhat interesting. But anyway, so those are the basics of getting something rendered and making a shader, applying that, and getting something that you can see that looks cool that's rendered inside of Octane. So let's take things a little bit further. Should I do that in a, I think I'll do that in a different, oh, one thing I wanted to mention before I get into that is that for this, I just assigned a sphere to this, but here in this scene, I've got this rock from Megascans that you can see is a very, very dense mesh, and I've got that assigned to the emitter, and in this emitter, there it is, in this emitter, we've got like 25,000 particles around here, and what I just wanted to show is that Octane can handle all that no problem. It's still very fast and snappy, so you can render lots and lots of geometry. This is one of the benefits, one of the things that Octane is really good at is, I mean, I don't know how many bajillion polygons this is, and it could definitely do a lot more. Let's say we did, I don't want to crash anything, but let's say we did 250,000. Let's see what happens. Nothing. It's perfectly fine with 250,000 of that really dense mesh. So that's just something to keep in mind, that you can assign anything to these particles. It can be a circle, it can be a rock, it can be a butterfly, it can be a person, it can be a bird, it can literally be anything. It could be an animated model, it could be some like piece of data, whatever. Sky's the limit. You can do whatever. All right. One more thing I wanted to talk about, I think I'll just make a new scene, is groups. So we talked a little bit about groups in my last tutorial, but a quick reminder, whenever you make an emitter and you've got some particles, you can basically break these particles up into groups. So if we select our emitter and we go to groups, control click a couple times. So now we've got two groups, and I'm just gonna say group 2 is gonna be red, and currently the setting is to randomly assign particles to a group. So you can see that if we press play, that's what we get. Particles are gonna be assigned here. I'm actually gonna go in here and just make one more group. Let's make group 3, and in here we'll let group 3 be yellow. And still, we're just gonna be randomly assigning to all 3 groups. So how do we get, what if we want to have different models assigned to all 3 of these groups? Well, let's go in here, let's add our same Octane tag, and we want to say geometry, and let's go to this, and let's make a cube, and let's make a sphere, and let's make a torus. And I'm going to do the sort of 1 equivalent for all of these. So for the cube, let's just set this to 1 by 1 by 1. And the sphere, we're going to set this to 1. And in the torus, I'm going to set this to 1 and 0.5. Okay, so all you need to do for this is, if we click use groups, you just have to put them in the order of your groups. So the first thing that you put in here is going to get assigned to group 1. So let's say the cube gets assigned to group 1, our sphere gets assigned to group 2, and this torus gets assigned to group 3. So now let's add some turbulence. Let's add some stronger turbulence. fine. Okay. And so you can see that it's respecting those groups. We haven't assigned any shaders to anything yet, so it's not getting any of these particle colors. But if we come in here and again, let's just here, instance color, grab our emitter, drop that in, put this in here, and drop this on these guys. And you can see that the groups are being respected and the colors are also being respected. So obviously, hopefully that gets your brain sort of gears going in, you know, just the sheer amount of power and usefulness that you can do with this. One of the things, again, that I mentioned last tutorial was about, you know, assigning things to groups. So instead of this just going to a random group, if we say first group only, then everything is going to get assigned to group 1. If we quick context, if in order to use this questions and answer system that's built into the emitter here, this all needs to be things using the CPU. Like I was just using this NX turbulence. That's going to screw things up if we're working with groups in the way that I'm working with them right now, where I want to see feedback in the viewport of things changing, of the groups changing. So that's why I deleted that. Okay, so and also if you wanted to do questions and answers with NX objects, then you want to use this NX question instead of this questions and answers that's built into the emitter. So, but let's use, this is kind of like the old system. So I'm going to add a question, age, is the particle age greater than 20 frames? If so, then add a direct action. What is that action? We're going to change groups. What's the new group? The new group is going to be group 2. Okay, so now at 20 frames, the particles change to group 2. I could come in here, add an additional question, and say, is the age greater than 40 frames? If it is, do a direct action. We're going to change group, and the new group is going to be group 3. Boom, group 3, boom, group 3. And we get something like that. So different models, different colors, all that sort of stuff. Okay, I think that's about it that I wanted to cover in this basics tutorial. Let me just think and make sure. Yeah, I mean, I talked about it really briefly, but here we've got like 2.3 million particles. And yeah, just even though I said it quickly, I just want to emphasize that this LOD setting is incredibly useful. I guess the reason that I'm emphasizing this is just because it took me, like, I was using X particles for a really long time before I started using this, and it's like something that you absolutely need to use, because if you are trying to do something where you're working with millions of particles, trying to show millions of particles in the Cinema 4D viewport, it's gonna chug like crazy. But if you use this, and also it didn't chug at all for this 2.3 million, so I didn't even bother changing it. But the fastest view here is going to be this dots. So you can see here that this is moving pretty fast. Let's say we do 2 times that. So let's do 2 million. Let's double it. So that at about we were at like frame 68, we'll have like 4 million particles. And we're still doing pretty good. If we go to our LOD now, let's set our LOD to only 2% and see what happens. Let's just see if we double it again to 4 million. So that'll give us like 9 million at frame 68. Let's see how that goes. You can see that it's still going pretty good. This is still pretty fast. Not too bad. And yeah, it's totally a workable thing to be working with millions and millions and millions of particles in the viewport and have it still be reasonable using that LOD setting. That's, again, this is kind of like, that doesn't really have to do with rendering X particles, but while I'm here, it's a good tip. I'm probably gonna like repeat that tip in tutorials all over the place because it's a super important setting and I missed it for a really long time. Let's see what that looks like before we take off. Or if it crashes. Didn't crash. Let's maybe bring the aperture down a bit. It's a bit much. But yeah, you can see because we got these particles additive, it's just really bright. Right. Back it up. Let's do that so we can actually see. And yeah, that looks pretty cool. The emission, we can definitely bring that down since there's so many adding on top of each other now. Maybe like 0.7. Yeah, that's better. So yeah, we're chugging a bit by having the render going and moving in the viewport, but considering that we've got 9 million, we're basically working with 9 million particles in the scene, it's not too shabby. Okay, anyways, I won't get too distracted with all that. As usual, if you like this content, like and subscribe to the channel. There's going to be more content coming. I'm eventually going to, do more than just X particle stuff, but I've kind of, there's a lot to cover going over X particle stuff. But yeah, there's going to be lots of stuff coming down the road that I'm excited to show you guys. So subscribe to stay tuned, and I'll see you all in the next tutorial.